Okay, I see we're at 3 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Early Career Professionals, Surviving and Thriving in Your First Few Years. Before I introduce our presenters, I wanted to let you know that they will be answering questions at the end of their presentation. And if you could please use the designated Q&A box, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. So if you just leave the chat box for kind of that other chatter that goes on and any questions that you have for the presenters, please put them in that Q&A box. And you can enter those at any time during the session. And so without further ado, all of our 5 presenters this afternoon come to us from SUNY Oswego. Their full biographies are available on the conference website, and they are Morgan Bond, Resource Sharing Librarian, Deborah Bauder, Resident Librarian, Juan Denzer, Discovery Services Librarian, Kate Jones, Acquisitions Librarian, and Erin Kovalsky, Access Services Librarian. So go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Lily. Can you all hear me okay? Great. So hopefully you can see my screen here with the slideshow. Thumbs up. Okay, great. I can't see all of your faces, so I'm kind of talking to a blank screen. Thank you all for being here. So Deb, I think you're on the first slide.
Yeah, so my name's Deb, and we wanted to start this conversation by giving you all a little bit of context about where we are and where we're coming from, so you can sort of place yourself within that context. So as Lily said, we're all from SUNY Oswego, Penfield Library. Right now we have 11 full-time librarians. We're down 4, and by the end of the year, if there's still a hiring freeze, we're going to be down about 7, I think. So we've had a lot of changes in addition to being frozen, as everyone is. And we have about 7,000 undergrads, 1,000 grads. We've got a lot of different majors and minors, and we're right on the shore of Lake Ontario. So maybe some of you have had a chance to come up and see us.
All right, Juan, on to the tenure process.
Yes, so the tenure process. I wanted to talk a little bit quickly about the tenure process, about going through ongoing documents and dropping activities. Often what I do to kind of help guide myself is, everything they tell you to keep these documents somewhere. And what I like to do as a tip is to use Google Keep. A lot of stuff I put there and I use in my Google Docs. Things that you should also keep track of that helps is, I found, is a lot of like thank you emails, not just kind of saving those emails, but actually printing them out, like taking screenshots. I think it's important. Especially to document a lot of that stuff. Oftentimes you don't think of like a simple thank you letter from a student or a thank you email from faculty, staff, or student, and also from people from the community. So I think when you think of your tenure process, you want to make sure that you are documenting everything that you feel is relevant to what you're doing. Even if it seems like it's not significant, like a thank you email, or I've gotten actual like cards, like handwritten cards that I've had in my tenure packet that I put in there. So I just encourage people to document everything. So anyone else want to speak up on any more of that?
I have a quick note. I have been a librarian for 1 year now, so I've only been through the review process one time. But at the time I went through it, I had only been working for less than half a year. So I didn't have a lot of the content to put in my portfolio that a lot of other librarians had. Like I hadn't taught any classes yet. I didn't have evaluations to include. So what I did is I just sort of wrote a lot more narrative, and I gave a lot of commentary about where I'm at and, you know, kind of my thoughts on things I had observed and where I could see myself growing and trying things. And that was really appreciated by the committee. So I just encourage you that if you feel like you don't have something to say, just talk about, you know, what you want to explore and what, you know, what you're thinking about where you are at in the process so that you have content to include.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I just want to add what Erin was saying. Yeah, oftentimes you come in and you feel like you might not have things. Also include things that you've tried. For instance, you submitted something for a publication or for a conference and you got rejected. That's always good to put in your package because it says, you know, you're actively trying. And the committee will look at that and they'll be like, you know, they can't accept everything, you know, a committee or, you know, a conference or publication can't accept everything, but the fact that you're putting an effort into that. So always document that stuff to say that I submitted to this, but I was rejected. That counts. At least our peer review committee makes sure that that counts towards showing that you're doing an effort.
A couple of things that I would say that were helpful to me in terms of, because I found the process really confusing. I've been here 2 years, and just going through the process a couple of times is keeping track of what you're doing throughout the year as you go along, so that at the end of the cycle, when you're trying to pull your folder materials together, you're not trying at that point to go through your calendar and remember everything. It's a good idea to have good notes in your calendar. But also just, you know, keep a document minimized on your screen or keep it in Google Docs and just drop stuff in as a bullet point, just dump it in there. It makes it a lot easier at the end when you're trying to pull materials together for your yearly report. The other thing is ask people who have been there longer and have been through the process to show you their folders. I've found everybody to be super helpful and people, you know, open to sharing what they've been doing, and it's really it helped me wrap my head around it to see somebody else's folder and to see a couple different people's folders, because everyone kind of does it differently, but it's just sort of helpful as you craft your own folder to see how people are organizing things and how they're doing it. So those are 2 tips I would have for putting together your tenure materials.
I would also, if you're unsure of anything, at the same time, ask people who are tenured or going through the process, like they're further along in the process than you. Don't be afraid to ask them. I've done that before. Ask them, hey, do you think this should be included? Or, you know, is this something I should add to my packet? Oftentimes what a lot of us do here at the library is we'll also send out emails to suggest to people, hey, you know, this something's coming up. Make sure you put that in your packet, or this is a good thing for you to add to your packet. So don't be afraid to ask people for kind of like recommendations on whether you think this applies or not. Especially if it's something that you're doing like within the community and maybe you're not sure of.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize real quick, anything that you're including in your packet, make sure you talk about it, explain why it's important, how it impacts the community, so the college. Even other librarians might be confused by the work you're doing. For example, when I first started, I went through and cleaned out our Iliad database and rewrote a script to help clear the logs every night. For me, that sounded like enough of an explanation, but when other people looked at it, they said, what's a script? What's SQL? What does that do? So I went through and actually explained by cleaning out The logs, it sped up the system a bit, which was freezing on us, which meant that students and other patrons could access the system more often without glitches. The requests would go through more quickly, and we weren't experiencing as much downtime. And then the cleanup piece, I also explained the importance there was just to help protect patron privacy. And again, just saying, oh, I cleaned up the database really didn't explain why that was important, especially to people outside the library.
Yeah, that's a good point. Always remember, if you're using acronyms, to spell everything out, right? Someone who is not a librarian or works in a library doesn't know what ALA is, doesn't know what SUNYLA is, all these things, ILL, they don't know what any of that is. Make sure you're very specific in that, because they will have no idea, and write it in a way that a general person can understand. You know, someone who doesn't know much, because oftentimes you'll have people looking at it who know nothing about libraries, or know nothing about maybe even academics, you know, people in the higher administration. I mean, they know academics, obviously, but they don't know exactly what you do.
Okay, on to our next slide, management of staff and students. And Kate, if you could take it away from here.
Okay, so this slide is kind of geared towards librarians who are head of departments or in charge of student workers. So something to remember for training, that everyone has their own style. Some people may like written instructions. Some people may want more hand-holding and have a supervisor sit down with them and walk them through it. So, you know, be flexible and talk with your employees on what works best for them. For performance evaluations, they can be hard to write, especially if it's your first time writing one. I know for myself, the first time I had to write them, I looked at old evaluations to try to get, you know, how is it formatted? What should I be looking for? And also to get other people's input in trying to be as clear as possible with feedback, as well as being diplomatic.
I just have a quick note about evaluations, and this kind of ties into disciplinary action, in that if you have a staff member who is exhibiting some kind of behavior that you need to address, it can be really useful to put it in their evaluation, to enter it as something for them to work on, so that you have documentation of you asking them to make some kind of improvement. Because if they don't, and you need the documentation down the road to actually take action, you have it in your evaluation that for this amount of time it's been addressed and we haven't seen the improvement that we've asked for.
Yeah, and also with disciplinary action, you don't have to go through this process alone. HR, especially at Oswego, was a great resource, as well as our supervisors and other coworkers that were supervisors. Two of us have had to fire people within the first year working as head of a department, and our HR department and our supervisors were a great help. And it's not easy to fire someone, no matter the reason. And the person from HR that I worked with really kind of, reassured me that, it should never be easy. And if it ever does, you kind of have a bigger problem and kind of have to look at yourself and why that is.
And just to touch base on students, it's a little bit of a different situation with them. They're oftentimes, this is their first job, they're balancing other obligations, so work versus class. you have to be flexible with them, but also prepare them for future jobs. You have to understand, if they're late a few times, they may not understand that that's not acceptable, or they may be still juggling getting from one end of campus to the other and may not understand that maybe they can't start a shift at a certain time. But you also have to prepare them for future jobs. So you're really doing them a disservice by just letting them get away with too much. And it may be something that just requires sitting down with them and discussing it. So for me, for my student workers, I found that it was hard to really police them, and it made them really nervous if I was standing over their shoulders all the time. So I created a flow chart just to kind of help remind them, if you're done with one task, you're not completely done with work, you can't pull out your laptop and start your homework, you should really move on to these other tasks. And if at that point you're completely done, there's nothing else to be done on that flow chart, come and see either one of the clerks or myself, and we'll tell you if there's something else to do. And just to kind of tell a story, when I first started, within the first couple months, I had to have a heart-to-heart with a student who was missing the majority of her shifts. And when she was at her shift, she was performing quite poorly. So I ended up sitting down with her, and rather than focusing on her work performance and being negative, I mentioned she may need more time for schoolwork. If she was having a hard time making her shifts, her schoolwork is more important. So if she can't do both at the same time, that should be where her focus is. Within a week, we had worked together, we cut down her schedule, and she was showing up for all of the shifts, on time, ready to go. She ended up doing a study abroad the following semester, and she thanked me in person for understanding, helping her realize that she didn't have to come to all the shifts as long as she talked to us. And she surprised me with a hug at the end of the semester. And I'd like to think it was a positive learning experience for both of us. All right, on to professional development. Deb, take it away, please.
So we put this right at the top, take advantage of every opportunity. You're going to see stuff come up in, webinars and workshops and conferences come up. It's a really good idea to sign up for lots of listservs, even though sometimes that can be annoying to get tons and tons of emails. I have a filter that I have set up in my emails so that all of the emails like that go in one place, and then a couple times a day maybe I will look at them, or even a few times a week. But all of those workshops and conferences are really important to attend. And if it fits within your schedule at all and you think it will be beneficial, definitely sign up. If you have professional development funds and your library pays for you to go to conferences, make sure you use them, like SUNYLA. But it's a really great, sometimes, I've been to conferences where I wasn't sure if I was even really interested, and I was like, well, maybe, a particular session, but it's amazing the ideas that you get by attending other people's sessions. So, go to lots of them, particularly right now. Use your professional development funds, and if you're able to apply for scholarships outside of your professional development funds, that looks good in your tenure folder. You can potentially, go do more things. And also look for opportunities to present and to publish. I think for me, it was difficult at first to sort of wrap my head around the idea that maybe I had something to say that people would want to hear. But, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be some grand idea. It can just be some change that you made. So, you start with a poster at a local conference, do presentations with a group, like we're doing a panel presentation. It kind of takes the pressure off for one person to have to speak the whole time. You can always send an email out. The first presentation I did, I sent an email out to a couple of listservs and found other people to be co-presenters with me from other colleges. So that works as well. But definitely do what you can to build up your resume and your professional development skills that way. Like take advantage of opportunities, because you'll notice that there's a lot of them.
I would also encourage people to partner with those outside your department. So oftentimes what I will do is I will partner with other teaching faculty. For instance, I have one from Comm Studies. He asked me to present at one of their annual conferences. And he also wants me to do a publication on PR and library. So I think that's a good way to seek out others outside. And the other thing I would also say is it's okay to, if there's something you've presented on or something you've developed, it's okay to like recycle these presentations. Not necessarily, I guess you could talk about the same thing and you could run the same presentation, but I know I've benefited greatly from kind of presenting my research that I've done numerous times at several different conferences. I know I've partnered with a friend of mine who worked for IEEE and now she works for Elsevier, and she's always asking me to present somewhere with her. I've had my presentations turned into books and other publications. So I would say don't feel like everything has to be new and fresh, because a lot of that stuff is still relevant, and there's nothing wrong with presenting it and then presenting it at another conference or making it into a publication.
I would also say, when you go to these conferences, make sure you take advantage of the opportunity to network and talk to people. Don't just hang out with the people that you know really well, because I've met a lot of people at different conferences, and really the library world isn't that big. So you start seeing some of the same people, and then later on, maybe you know that somebody at a different college is doing such and so, and then you can connect with them. So it's a really great opportunity to, just talk to people. Talking to people is always good, and getting to know people. So use every conference and every opportunity there to get to know what people are up to.
Good point. Reach out.
All right, Kate, on to the next topic.
So at Penfield, we've had the past couple of years a lot of different changes, and kind of developing this slide and thinking about it, it was kind of crazy how much has changed since I think all of us have started. I know Morgan and Juan have been at Oswego for probably around 3 years. Deb and I are 2, and Erin is 1. And, we've experienced a lot of different changes within that small amount of time. So for one example, within my first year, we were preparing for a migration to a new LMS, which if you're part of SUNY, a primo. And during that time, we were told that we are going to have new building partners coming into the building in the first floor, and it would have to be reconfigured, which directly affected my department in tech services, as well as Morgan's and IOL. And I had to inform my staff, who have all been working there for an average of 20 years or more, that their space was going to change, which was pretty daunting. But being upfront about what was going on, and involving them and thinking about solutions and how to reconfigure our new space helped this change. I still had an employee counting floor tiles to make sure she had as much room as another employee, but overall it went smoothly.
Yeah, so as Kate said, both of our areas were directly impacted. And it was a huge disruption for the interlibrary loan department. Supplies had been accumulated for about 10 years in the same spot, with about like 6 to 8 file cabinets and shelves just full of envelopes and boxes. And every other kind of office supply you can think of. So inventorying the materials, organizing them, figuring out how to move them, and I'll admit, secretly coming in at night to throw things in the trash was a bit of a challenge. It was also a challenge to figure out how to smush the department into a much smaller space. We all had to work together to come to an agreement on the new shared space, who was going to sit where. Yes, you have to share a space with the students. We figured it out, and we've all settled into the new office space, but lots of communication was involved.
I actually came in around the same time that was going on. And this was right after we migrated to Alma, which was interesting timing. I had come from another SUNY, so fortunately I knew the technical side of everything, but the person that I replaced did not. And really focused more on their liaison and instruction work, and had kind of just let the access services unit handle itself. So I started at a time when they had a lot of questions. They didn't know how to do a lot of things. They hadn't had support or help figuring anything out. So I had to kind of like figure out what my job was, as far as meeting all of their needs, understanding what was going on, showing them how to do things. But focusing on that work really helped me kind of design my position the way that I, wanted it to be. And I just worked slowly with them. I built their trust. I helped them figure things out. And then I sort of started implementing my own vision. It took time, but I don't know, it worked out for me, I guess. You get to know the people, you find out how you can help them, and then they trust you when you want to make changes.
Yeah, going along with what Erin said, like after a week after I started, I was originally hired as acquisitions librarian, but a week after I started, our cataloging librarian retired, and I also absorbed cataloging and serials, and I was kind of thrown into an area that I wasn't very familiar with, and was no expert, and I knew it would take me some time to come to terms that it was okay, that I was clueless, and luckily my staff that I had were very patient with me, and they kind of showed me the ropes. I also took a couple different classes to try to come up with speed in cataloging, and in figuring out how I wanted to run the department. Like Erin said, with Alma, a lot of change, we could kind of start looking at different procedures, and kind of modifying them to fit Alma and kind of how I wanted to structure the department. And I was grateful when one of my coworkers told me, that no one else at SUNYLA knew cataloging, so they would believe anything I told them. Or I could make procedures how I wanted them, since no one was going to judge me if I, catalog something incorrectly. So I think that kind of lifted some burden off of me, and stress and anxiety that I had about fulfilling a position that I wasn't completely prepared to fill.
One more sort of small thing that I would say about major changes is I've had 3 offices in the last 2 years, and in a way it's been kind of good because it's given me an opportunity to not accumulate too much. So I would say just as a small thing, try to not just sort of keep everything, as you're going, try and toss things, keep things cleaned out and a little more streamlined. It'll make your life easier. It certainly made my life easier when I moved into the 3rd office. I didn't have a ton of stuff, but it's also just useful to not have everything. So.
Good point, Deb. I know when I took over my office, 4 previous interlibrary loan librarians had been in that office, and I found things from old super floppies to
yeah,
just weird documentation.
It just jumbles your head to have all that extra junk. So.
All right, Juan, if you could take it from here.
Okay. So peer mentoring and seeking out experienced mentors. So one of the things that you definitely have to look into, and this is usually a conversation with your administration and others, is to know if you even have like a peer mentoring system, right? And I know that previously when I worked at Binghamton University, and I wasn't a faculty librarian, I was just a professional staff working in IT, but I know they had a well-structured mentoring process. And then when I got here to Oswego, it wasn't as structured because we were kind of short-staffed, and we still are short-staffed. So when I asked about it, it was more of ask somebody if they want to mentor you rather than assign someone to me. So definitely seek out someone if you can. Obviously ask them, because oftentimes people's workload. And I found that people, even though they have a big workload, people don't turn you away. I mean, unless they're like really overwhelmed, and then they'll usually suggest someone else to help you. So I would definitely seek out a mentor, especially when you're starting out. Let's see, non-professional mentor, coworkers. Yeah, and the other thing too that I know that might help, and depending on how big your library is also professional development. People have started kind of their own mentoring system. Like I know at Binghamton, they started that when I worked there, and that was just for professional staff. And that kind of helped me, because I did not, as a person who worked in IT in the library, I did not know what mentoring, like a mentoring program actually was. And that kind of prepared me for when I came here to Oswego to know like what questions to ask, who to kind of partner with, and things like that. Anyone else want to add?
Yeah, I would definitely say having a mentor in some capacity is really helpful. Everyone, I haven't found anyone to like turn me away if I've asked questions, but you know, picking people's brain who've been there a while and who know the processes and the specifics of where the organization that you're within, it's just so helpful. I had Chris, who I'm sad is gone. Kate had him too, I know. But I used to stop in all the time, and at some point I realized I better, you know, write my questions down and just stop in less frequently so I didn't annoy him because I was stopping in a lot. But it's just really helpful to have those people there that you can go to and be like, geez, I'm really not sure what to do in this situation if you're new. And it can be anything from like managing a student or dealing with a situation, but also how to do your tenure portfolio. You know, there's a lot of ways that just having somebody to ask questions to is really useful. So I've had several, and I'm about to have a new one again because my mentor is retiring. So I think just, you know, finding somebody who, as Juan said, has the time to, and we sort of mentor each other too. I feel like, you know, all of us here on this panel, and, you know, asking lots of questions and talking to each other. And you can do that as well. Just, you know, support each other and sort of do that peer mentorship.
Yeah, like Deb said, our mentor retired, so I currently don't have a mentor at Oswego, but I just started a mentorship program through ALA, through like the tech services, and that started, you know, June 1st. So hopefully, you know, that will kind of pick up where my mentor at Oswego, you know, stopped. But along with that, like Deb and I started out at the same time. So we kind of were like, you know, non-official mentors almost to each other. We started getting together each Friday morning if we are available to just kind of chat and talk about what each of us were working on. And since we were in different areas that, didn't always overlap, it was great to be informed and like what was going on in another area, potentially learning of something to collaborate in, or, what good listserv to join, or where to try to start publishing or do book reviews. And it was definitely great to have someone else kind of be clueless with and bounce ideas off, and not to, feel stupid for asking questions.
I'm muted. There we go. The next thing we really wanted to talk about and touch on was time management and workload balance, how and when to say no. I'll admit I'm still learning how to do both of those. If you can, turn off your email on your phone, don't look at your work laptop. Try to take time for yourself just to decompress. It's really important to take that time for yourself. During the day, try not to sit in your office and eat lunch at your computer. I'm sort of bad at that. If you can, find a group of coworkers you enjoy hanging out with, schedule a lunch at least once a week. Just everyone get out of their offices, hang out, maybe discuss what kind of issues are going on, or if you can, talk about things other than work. I know a lot of us have pets and we just kind of decompress by talking about our pets. For me, it's also gardening. If you can, use your calendar to block off time to get your own work done. I know many of us, if we have like a big project we're working on or some kind of research, we'll shut our door, put on our calendar that we're unavailable, and just try to block off like an hour, maybe once a week. Just work on things in small chunks. Learning to say no. I'd like to hear from all of you in a little bit how you say no, because we're still learning how to do this. For me, documenting your time spent on a day-to-day, on the day-to-day responsibilities and projects has been really helpful. So at the start of this pandemic, we were asked to document all of our activities every day. And I'd never done that. It really made me realize how much time those little day-to-day activities really take up. So whether it's just meeting with my staff or checking why the system isn't working, why people can't log in, answering emails. If you're ever in doubt of how much you do in a normal day, I highly recommend just documenting a week and writing everything down. You'll probably surprise yourself. And remember, as a unit head, if you are running a department, you deal with other responsibilities and priorities that may not be obvious to those in charge, not in charge of a department. I've had conversations where I'm like, I can't take this other committee. I've got meetings with my staff once a week. Not to mention we share an office space. So a lot of times I'm bouncing in and out, helping with issues, especially with the new system. And it's, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, but it does take up a good chunk of time. If you can, just a few tips, making instruction videos to save time. Because of the pandemic, we've been recording a lot of library instruction sessions. That really has helped me just give the professor the video and then later on do Q&A with the students rather than repeating the same session over and over again. I know Kate has done that with some of her bio classes. And with my art classes, those are typically 3 hours in length. I used to stay there the entire 3 hours, which typically I can only teach library instruction for about an hour before students start falling to sleep. And I used to feel guilty leaving, but now I've gotten comfortable enough with the art department faculty to say, look, I'll do an hour. If students have questions, they can come find me later. But that's my limit. Kate, did you want to touch base on those bio classes that you've recorded sessions for and how that's kind of saved you some time?
Well, I haven't yet. So my plan for the fall, because mostly for bio, the classes that come to the library are usually like freshman 100 levels and senior seminars. And this past fall, I had 14 freshman classes come, and at least half wanted to come twice. One, just to have an intro to the library, a second one to come and just learn about Zotero, which is a citation manager. And so I've already kind of decided for fall, you know, even since we don't, you know, have a plan yet in place, but regardless, that I'm planning on probably recording, you know, a library instruction intro to the library video, as well as videos for Zotero. Because even if we are in person, just due to social distancing, there's no way that the bio classes, which I think is one of the main majors at Oswego, they can fit into with social distancing in our classrooms all at once. So just kind of doing videos, and as well with being down librarians will save, you know, me time, hopefully. So that's my plan for the fall.
I'm going to interrupt for a second just to let you know we do only have about 10 minutes left, and we have had a number of questions come in. So at any point you want to jump to Q&A instead, just let me know.
Excellent. We're actually on our last slide, which is just a couple of resources we've used. Since these will be shared later and this will be recorded, they're there for you to look at. And now we're ready to move on to Q&A.
Okay, great. So we'll start with a question that came in when you were talking about attending conferences. And for a little bit of context, this came from somebody who works at a smaller community college where, as far as tenure goes, they're not required to publish. So the question was, when you're talking about attending conferences, does just attending go a long way towards the tenure decision, or do you have to be more involved?
I would say that, you know, it depends on the committee, you know, and that's something, you know, when you're going through this whole process, you can ask them. But one of the things, if you feel like just attending isn't enough, what I would suggest you can do is actually give a presentation, a local presentation to your librarians and your staff on the actual conference that you attended. I know a lot of times librarians have done that. They'll go to a conference and they'll kind of like summarize what they've learned and give a in-house presentation. And that definitely goes a long way, especially if you're at a smaller institution and they don't necessarily require you to say publish and present, like, you know, if you think it's just enough to attend. That's a good way to make it more worthwhile.
And I know for me, when I first started, I didn't have any kind of topic to start researching, and I wouldn't have been ready to present on any of it anytime soon. I attended a bunch of conferences, either virtual or in person, and I included those in my professional development write-up just to show that I was learning about the profession and engaging with other professionals.
Great, thank you. So another question, somewhat related to presentations and publications. How do you assess if your research topic is really worthwhile?
I would say, you know, that's kind of like a tough question. You know, people always ask this, and I'm going to kind of like pick on Morgan a little bit because I know we've kind of had this conversation, and Morgan's like, well, I don't know if I have anything worth to say. I mean, we've had this conversation before, and I'm like,
Several
Morgan,
times.
I'm like, Morgan, you have a lot to say. What you do everything you do, even if you're saying the same thing over and over, it's new. You present it in a new light. I've even done presentations on programming projects that I've developed that never actually saw the light of day. I came up with an idea and people loved it, but I didn't have the resources to develop it. But I still assess that as a success, not as a failure. So I always look at it as long as you put something out there, it's definitely worthwhile. I wouldn't focus too much on whether it's worthy or not, because people always want to hear things. They want to hear about stuff we're always talking about or stuff that's new and exciting. You know, I guess my thing is like, don't be afraid to not try.
I think if you just look at what you do too, you know, I've seen some really good presentations that are on like the smallest detail, like somebody added a button to their website and then this changed and this happened. And, you know, so sometimes things you don't think they're going to be, it wouldn't be a good conference presentation, but I would just encourage you to look at sort of every decision you make in terms of getting through your day and like, you know, decisions you make and choices you make about how to do things. And that's interesting to people. People want to know like how you decided what to do and what happened, you know, even if it wasn't a success. Like Juan was saying something, you know, he came up with this idea, but then he didn't actually do anything with it because he didn't have the funds. But, you know, people are, it can help other people grow to hear your thought processes. So you definitely do have something to say. I feel like everybody does. You just don't necessarily think it at first. So just look at everything you do every day and look at all the details. There's a lot in there.
Yeah, I remember just quickly one example, working in IT in the library, we had an issue upgrading our Iliad server, and I discovered it was kind of an issue with third-party software. And I remember my colleague telling me, he's like, you know, you should tell somebody about that, save a guy a lunch, you know, and that's the way we talk in IT. It's like save a guy from like having to work all night and not being able to eat. And I did, and I actually contacted the people that developed it, and it led to a presentation. They were so thankful. They're like, yes, can you present at our conference your findings and tell people? So you never know, even something as small as like, hey, I found a bug in your software. And they're like, yes, please come talk about it. And you never know where it leads.
Okay, I'm going to skip around in our questions a little bit. There were a few that came across as far as when you were talking about mentorship. So I'm going to combine a couple questions here. Somebody asked what the ratio of how many tenured faculty librarians are at your library and therefore available to mentor, because it seems like not enough based on what you've been talking about. And similarly, another person mentioned that a number of librarians all kind of started at the same time, replacing a number of older ones who had recently retired. So there was no seasoned mentor there also. So just in general, and you did touch on this a bit, what advice you have in these situations?
So currently, I think we have 4 tenured librarians. And we have 2 of those people are retiring this year. So we will be down to only having 2 tenured librarians. And so there's too many of us for them to mentor. So I think we've been in talks, and it might not be kind of like a one-to-one mentorship. It might kind of be like we meet as a whole group to talk about things. I know for myself, since both the acquisitions librarian and the cataloging librarian retired kind of before I started, I kind of had to find my own way, if that makes sense. In my department, they didn't really leave me any guidance on how things were done. Luckily, most of my staff had been there for, 20 plus years, and kind of could give me some background on different procedures, and kind of work with them to potentially change them or, keep them. And that's kind of why I've been like, now I'm in the ALA Tech Services mentorship program, trying to find other avenues for mentorship kind of in my area, since I can't specifically get that at Oswego.
Yeah, and look at other professional organizations. A lot of times there's mentorship programs within them. So for me, for resource sharing interlibrary loan, I had information delivery services. They had a mentorship program within that, and we belonged to it. So my mentor helped me a ton when I first started. And you can always go to these conferences, find someone else that's in your area, and just ask them questions. Say, hey, can I have your email? Could I, ask you a few questions about this or that? And I would say most other librarians are going to be willing to help you and answer questions.
The other thing I would also say about mentorships is, you have a lot of friends you've worked with. I know a lot of librarians I've worked with at Binghamton. I still ask them for mentoringship. I'm not going to mention their names because they're awesome, but I always contact them and hey, what should I do? And they give me the best advice. So it's not just within your own institution, but that's the great thing about SUNY as a whole is you have all these people that'll help you outside of your own institution.
Yeah, and I definitely did that same thing. I kind of, contacted my old supervisor from a previous institution who was a cataloging librarian to kind of ask her questions of what do I do in this case, and what are some websites or tools to help me kind of originally catalog stuff. One problem I ran into though is my previous institution was Dewey, and at Oswego we're LC, so some things she couldn't completely help me translate, but it was a start.
Great. These have all been really great answers. This has been some great information you've all shared today. I know we're getting low on time and we still have so many questions to answer. Do you want to do one more? Okay.
Sure.
So one more we'll ask. This is kind of a two-part question. Do you get any official release time to work on your activities? And do you meet regularly with your supervisor or your director to discuss how you're progressing on your timeline?
I guess I'll answer this question. So for the director, I think, at least for me, she meets with me every other month. I think everyone might be a different timeline. Some people she might meet with once a month, some once a week, kind of depending on your job role. And then my direct supervisor, I meet with every other week. And I think that's the same for a lot of people on this call. And, we just kind of go over what we're working on, our progress, where we need some help. I think the part of that question was if we have time to work on our own activities. Is that kind of for research, or is that the question was?
So kind of to answer that, so we don't get kind of release time until you reach you actually get tenure, and then you can go on sabbatical. But I know other institutions, they give extra time. I know at Syracuse University, I heard that they get an extra week of time off, and they can, of their choosing, for them to work on projects and research, which is in line with the teaching faculty as they get extra time, in addition to their vacation time. we don't get that. You have to kind of work around, you know, your schedule. So I would definitely make sure that you let your supervisor know the projects you're working on, so that you don't focus too much on one, and then they feel like you're not doing, you know, your work or things like that. And also let them know so that they support you, so they know it's supported. Oftentimes I've run into me working with projects, partnering with other faculty, and then what happens is the supervisor's like, well, we didn't really kind of like, we weren't aware of that. We didn't know you were doing that, and we didn't like fully support that. So just kind of be mindful of that, to not fall into that kind of pitfall of not letting them know.
Great, thank you all. We're getting down towards 4 o'clock, and I believe some people have another session to go to, or there might be meetings coming up. Do you have any last words of wisdom to pass on to the rest of us?
I just wanted to quickly answer one question there that says, weird question, but how easy it is not to get tenure. I think you have to pretty much screw up pretty bad not to get tenure. A lot, unless, you know, unless it's like really like rigorous, you're at an institution where they're like, you have to have 3 peer-reviewed publications, you have to have, you know, 5 presentations a year. That's brutal. But I know for us, you really have to like really be bad to like not get tenure.
I was told it would reflect very poorly on the rest of the library if someone didn't get tenure. By the time you hit tenure, you've had enough reviews and sit downs with your managers that if they haven't told you you're behind schedule, you're missing something.
Yeah, that's a good point. It makes the library look bad too, and they don't want that, you know. Good point.
Thank you everyone who attended, and thank you, Lily, for all of your hard work getting us, wrangling us and giving us all of our questions. And thank you to the rest of my team.
Yes, thank you all for a great presentation this afternoon.